We're going to enter the cremation grounds now. Before we quite get there, we're going to go back to the time of the Buddha. And one of my favorite stories from the Buddhist canon, from the Pali Canon, in which the Buddha talks about his experience before he's enlightened. And what he reveals is that he experienced fear. So we know that he left a very comfortable life to live homeless in the wilds of India, which was not easy and was probably sometimes dangerous. And he talked about how he would be out sometimes and how a fear and dread would come upon him. And he considered to himself, what if I intentionally sought out places that inspired that fear and dread in myself? Probably sensing that there was something there in his selfing, so to speak, that was being challenged and that perhaps would reveal something of the path to liberation. So he would intentionally go to places that were a bit haunted. He would go to shrines. He would go to cremation grounds. He would go to places at night, and he would meditate, and he would go about his business. And his teaching for himself, or what he communicated to his disciples, was that when this is how it's translated, he said, when the fear and dread came upon me, he would just continue doing what he was doing. So if he was meditating, he would continue meditating. If he was walking, he would continue walking. If he was lying down, he would just continue lying down. So he would continue in whatever behavior he was engaged in, experiencing the fear and dread until it subsided. And he talked about things like hearing a stick snap in the jungle and the fear and dread coming upon him and then having to deal with that. So I found that really inspiring to hear the Buddha, an awakened person, reflecting back pre-enlightenment, talking about times where he was having tremendous anxiety, where he was having a fight, flight, or freeze response. So this sense of not only experiencing fear as something that comes up in spiritual life, but this sense of actually approaching things that scare us as a way of learning how to come into contact with that sort of fear and in a way absorb it and move through it. For many of us, this begins simply when we realize our own mortality. We start to become aware that we're going to lose our lives at some point. And so when we think about that, sometimes that might provoke a lot of anxiety. So right from the beginning of the Buddhist tradition, there's this sense that fear can arise as we grapple with the big questions of spiritual life. And there's a sense that there can be some value in that it means something, and in some sense might even be a doorway to something deeper. So the cremation grounds, as a symbol, as a metaphor, and as a reality in India, these were actual places, and they are actual places. Lana reminded me today that I had been to India and I'd seen the burning ghats at Varanasi. So it's people are burned, cremated in the open, still in India. But as a as a symbol, as a metaphor, there is really a lot going on, and there's a lot of significance as it pertains not only to people who literally go to cremation grounds to meditate, but for those of us who approach that more as a living metaphor. I just want to read a passage. This is from the Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava, which unfortunately is out of print in a hardcover, but you can get these now as a soft cover. If you want the hardcover, I guess you had to be a Buddhist in the 90s. So I'm just going to read a passage from that, which describes a cremation ground. And I think there's 8 chapters in this describing cremation grounds, because when Padmasambhava, who was a historical but very legendary Buddhist teacher, when he went into these cremation grounds, he practiced and he achieved new forms. So throughout the text, you encounter these new forms of Padmasambhava. The text is written in dream language. The whole text can read pretty bizarrely. And these cremation ground descriptions are particularly strange. So I'm gonna read it to you just so you get a sense of what you're coming into contact with as a symbol. Now there is in the land of Kashmir the cemetery of sleep with mysterious ways, called Radiant Beatitude, which is 5.5 leagues in circumference. In the center is the stupa Kanika, which arose alone with beautiful colors, a natural place of all religion, the dwelling of the great Lamia, Karima. In the north, the great tree of the tombs, which is called Which Takes by the Nose, bears many cemetery creatures, both langurs and small monkeys, and there are Dakinis who perform mudras while dancing. Beneath the water of the tombs, horrible decay, is a teeming of creatures of the tombs, some laughing, others weeping, others who quarrel and who kill. In the south of the cemetery roars the fire of the cremations, spontaneous fire, which jumps with the noise of a mouse and a crash which is heard at a league's distance. And within the fire, many gods of the fire, rising from goats, hold sacrificial spatulas made of hollow bones. In the west is the funereal wind's whirling companion, and in the gusts are numerous ghouls who carry away cadavers and blow, in the manner of flutes, in shin bones which they have on hand. In the northwest is the king of the mountain of tombs with 100 peaks, and there remain many creatures of the tombs who have a treasure of miraculous gems. On the northeast side, the Empusa who squints, blue, wearing trousers of red cotton, has the beak of a peacock, the eyes of an owl, and the 6 necklaces of bones on its breast. There is a mirror in the middle of its forehead, and its opulent coil of hair is tied with the Vajra circle. It flays with its 2 hands, mannequins with human skin. In the southwest, on a mule, is the goddess fiend of the tombs, and in this cemetery, his back against the stupa, the saint for 5 years made the wheel of the Dharma turn for the Dakinis. So each of the cremation grounds depicted in the text are strange in that way. Some of them are more bizarre than others. Some of them have more gory detail, I chose one that wasn't as gory. So it's quite graphic, and there's a lot going on in this imagery. And there is specific symbolism that is nested in this image of the cremation ground within Tibetan Buddhism. There's very specific symbolism. For instance, each of these cremation grounds has a tree, and the tree represents the central energy channel in the body. Each of the cremation grounds have bodies of water or lakes, which are said to represent the relative bodhicitta. And they have decaying corpses, of course, which represent ego death. So there's very specific references in the images, but we're not going to get into those particulars. What we are going to do, we're going to explore this symbolism in a more general sense, but in a way that for us, I think, is no less potent. So the cremation ground, at the end of the day, is not only a place of death, but a place of transformation. At first glance, when we see the cremation ground, it is very much a place of death. It's got terrifying things in it, things that we're not normally exposed to. And as you probably saw from the imagery, not everyone apparently was burned there. Some people were burned, but sometimes bodies were left to decay. And there was a tradition at that time of people going to these places and actually practicing, not just Buddhists, but there's an important sense in the Buddhist tradition that was something that people did, particularly the siddhas, of which Padmasambhava really was a siddha in some sense. And so in the reading I just did, we catch a little glimpse of Padmasambhava at the end. They mention the saint, and he's depicted as sitting next to the stupa for 5 years, teaching the Dharma to the Dakinis. There's different little dramas that play out in his meetings there, but in each of these cremation grounds, he's also given a new name. So there's a sense that it is a place of fear, it is a place of death, but it can be a place of inspiration and transformation. So Sangharakshita coins a term, the crucial situation. And in his discussions of the cremation grounds, he described the cremation ground experience as a crucial situation in which we must transform or back off a bit. So a crucial situation is not necessarily just a difficult life event that presents a challenge. It really does depend on how you approach it. I've been in plenty of situations that I would consider crucial, which were not necessarily spiritually significant or necessarily character building. So it partially depends on our approach to these situations as they arise. Sometimes they arise naturally in our lives because life is precarious and it's easy to find ourselves in a crucial situation. And sometimes we create them through our practice. Spiritually speaking, the crucial situation is something that you choose to enter. And in a sense, you seek it out. You create the conditions for the crucial situation to arrive, which means you're creating the conditions for transformation to arise. You can just sort of find yourself there. This has happened to me before. During a period of more intense practice, you may not even be looking for it, but sometimes it just arises. And quite often, a lot of us contact something of this vibe when we're on retreat or when we're engaging in a challenging Sangha project, like starting a new center or maintaining a new center, or living in a community, that sort of thing. So I think there's perhaps at least two dynamics going on there. There's just the stuff of life, which can be very difficult and challenging, and which can give rise to the potential of a spiritually engaging situation. And then there's the stuff we create within the arena of our practice quite intentionally. Just another quick quote from Sangharakshita. He says this a little more intensely in this paragraph. He says, "The cremation ground is a place you choose to enter. You don't wait for death to come to you, for the corpse to pass by in the street outside. You go looking for death. You go seeking out fear. You court them, invite them. Come on, do your worst. I'm ready." So the cremation ground represents a crucial situation, a situation of crisis into which you deliberately plunge yourself and in which you are compelled to change, in which you must develop or die. In short, it is the place where you deliberately seek out whatever other people avoid, indeed, whatever you yourself want to avoid. The cremation ground is therefore a symbol of transformation, the transformation of your whole being from the depths to the heights, the transformation of every aspect of your consciousness. So, a lot of us at the beginning, when we were introducing ourselves, talked about fear, and there was mention of fear in the write-up for the retreat. And it's very natural that that's the area we're going to be exploring as we look at images of impermanence. So fearlessness, which was also mentioned, it is a virtue. It is a quality that we can cultivate in the same way that we cultivate our capacity for generosity, for instance. You could say you can even approach fearlessness through your practice of generosity. So fearlessness is something we can grow more accustomed to. As we take little risks, as we feel a bit of discomfort and sit with it rather than avoiding it. When something scary arises in our meditation, and instead of trying to ignore it, perhaps we go find our Kalyana Mitra, our good friend, and we talk it through. So fearlessness begins to arise in our practice through taking little risks. It can arise, big fears can arise, fear of death, loneliness, insanity, situations where our confidence is challenged, situations where we experience really strong negative emotion like jealousy, and we're aware that we're feeling terrible jealousy, but we also want to overcome it. Those can all be crucial situations if we rise to meet them. And there's a connection here. For those of you who have heard of the system of practice, we talk about, or the path of practice, we talk about the stage of spiritual death and rebirth. So we talk about the stage of integration, the stage of positive emotion. We talk about receptivity, but there's also this weirdly described spiritual death and rebirth. And really the cremation grounds embodies that process. So in the stories of Padmasambhava, you know, we see him enter these places and he's transformed. He gets a new form and a new name. But we also see this again in the story of the Buddha. I think actually the 4 sights is an example of spiritual death and rebirth. In the first three sites, the Buddha sees a corpse. He sees an elderly person, and he sees someone who's terribly ill. And the full implication of that hits him, that not only is he subject to those things, but everyone he loves and he cares about are also subject to those things. And that's what compels him to actually leave his comfortable situation and to go off into the jungles of India to work out his liberation. Which is the fourth site. The fourth site, which represents spiritual rebirth, was the site of a wandering mendicant. It was the site of someone who had given up everything to pursue spiritual truth. And so that's what inspired him. And what's interesting about that image is that it does also reveal that spiritual death and rebirth is a process. It starts with an initial vision or inclination, and it unfolds from there until one is completely awake, until one has shed all selfishness, all hatred, and has overcome fear because one has gone beyond the duality of birth and death. So that's quite a lot in that fourth site of the wandering mendicant. So I think that the process of spiritual death and rebirth is present in those images. This next bit, because we're running out of time, I'm just going to go through, I just want to mention this. I just want to at least mention this, that there is some very deep symbolism in the cremation grounds. The cremation grounds are often depicted in mandalas, and there's 8 of them depicted in these mandalas, the 8 great cremation grounds. And these 8 great cremation grounds correspond to a Yogacara teaching on the 8 consciousnesses. And so there's a sense embedded right in the symbolism that not only are the cremation grounds a sort of real place you could go to, and not only are they a living metaphor in a sense, but they're also kind of a map of ourselves. They represent our consciousness within the reality of impermanence, and all the pain that can bring as human beings, and with all the potential of transformation, because these 8 consciousnesses that the 8 great cremation grounds represent transform into the wisdom of the 5 Buddhas. So the 5 sense consciousnesses, eye, ear, and so on, are transformed into the all-accomplishing wisdom of Amoghasiddhi. The mind consciousness, the consciousness of mental objects, transforms into the wisdom of discernment, which is the wisdom of Amitabha. The defiled mind consciousness, which is, just to put it briefly, is dualistic consciousness, transforms into the wisdom of equality or sameness, which is represented by the golden yellow Buddha, Ratnasambhava. The store consciousness, the relative store consciousness, which contains impressions left in our minds from our past experience, including our past lives. This transforms into the mirror-like wisdom of Akshobhya. And then the absolute store consciousness is reality itself. No subject, no object, just pure awareness. And this transforms into the wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu, the Tathata, or reality just as it is, as represented by the white Buddha Vairochana. the Buddha of white light. And when these cremation grounds are depicted on mandalas, they're in the 4 major directions and then in the 4 intermediate directions, which implies that basically our whole experience is a cremation ground. Just by fact of being born, we've entered a cremation ground because we already know how it ends. So we're in it whether we like it or not. And the value of human life, the value of having found the Dharma, of having found these teachings, is that we do have an opportunity to do something quite different with that life. And perhaps to transcend the impossible problem of life and death altogether, as the Buddha did.